This is a little bit of a unique session. We had a bunch of, or 2 meetings beforehand to kind of organize this and make it as good a session as possible. And I think hopefully you'll get some good messages from the group. It's a little bit of a personal journey as well. And I hope that some of the speakers will generate some good discussion at the end. We are going to keep all the questions to the end so that we can get through all the talks. Thank you very much. I'll start by introducing Perry DeAugustine. Perry and I have been sort of linked mostly by discussions, and he was introduced to me. He comes from the industry world and serves as a coach, a mentor, which he's been to me over the last year or so. And I've certainly learned a lot from him and hope that you guys do the same today. Perry?
Thank you. It's the early 1950s. A woman's walking down the street in Paris, going to enter in the art district and going to enter into a coffee shop to get a coffee. She sits and looks, and sitting outside at a table is Pablo Picasso. She stops and says, "You're Pablo Picasso." He says, "Yes, I am." And she says to him, "I admire your work." And she goes on and rants and raves. And she picks up a napkin and she said, "Would you be kind enough to sketch something for me? And I would treasure it forever." "I'd be happy to. Go in, get your coffee. I should have something ready for you when you come out." She comes back out. He holds up the napkin. And she goes, "Oh my God, it's gorgeous. And it's signed too." He goes, "Yes, that'll be $10,000. She goes, $10,000? It only took you 5 minutes. He goes, "No, it took me 40 years. That is experience. And that's what you drive to create value, is by your experience and how you choose to use your experience and to create that value. I submit to you, sitting in the room right now, you've created your value. Started at medical school, you went to residency, you went to fellowships, all that struggle and hard work that you did, you created your value through your experiences, just as I did. I spent over 20 years managing and leading people, and I had to change each and every time of the way. I had to learn to be a leader. I was not a leader. I had to learn it, and I became a student of it over time. And as I evolved and changed and went into different businesses, I went from a sales leader to what's called a business leader, where I was responsible for profit and loss. I was responsible for market share, all the things that drive a business. And then I was part of an M&A and integrating a business, a completely different business I knew nothing about. It was all exciting, but it was a struggle. I had to learn to be a leader. So when Jean asked me to do this, I said I'd be happy to. And I thought I'd start the talk with, what is the definition of a leader? What's the definition of leadership? And here are 2 very simple statements. But it doesn't define a good or a bad leader, it just defines leadership. I then thought, what's my voice? What's my experience? And after 20 years, I can tell you the things that drove me to be the better leader and the focus I wanted to do, it was on focusing on my talents and my values and evolving my behaviors. How do I change? Because talents and values stay the same, but your behaviors can change. And with that, I had to change. I strived to create a culture of inclusiveness, and I recognized over time, as I transitioned from job to job, role to role, that it was transferable. What I learned was transferable. And I really focused on vision and mission, and most important, the culture. Because I knew if I did that, I could create a team that could do wonderful things. And I was very fortunate to have very strong teams. But that's my voice, my experience. You don't know me, and I don't know you. So I went on a journey, and I interviewed 15 different leaders, physician leaders, and CEOs of various sizes of organizations. I asked each and every one of them 4 questions. What is the definition of a positive leader? And what are the 3 to 5 behaviors? And what I learned over time was that I needed to create and pull diverse talents together and trust inclusiveness. That was how I saw it. And create a vision and mission and drive that culture. And guess what came back from the 15? Exactly that. And then on the behaviors, I consolidated them into 5 groups: trustworthy, compassionate, self-aware, courageous, curious. And each and every one said, must have fun. And you say to yourself, how do you have fun? You have fun because guess what? When you form a team and you form a mission and a vision, you're all working together for a purpose. And that's what people want to do. And that's what you do every day. Question number 2, what have you learned and adapted? I asked each and every one of them, and you can see a laundry list of what they learned and adapted. What I had to learn and adapt was I had to change. I had to become more self-aware because I was kind of, candidly, a little bit arrogant. And I had to learn, I had to temper that. I had to make myself vulnerable. And guess what came back? All those things. And the one on listen was really interesting. One of the physician leaders I talked to, he said, you know what, Perry? I went through a 360 several years ago, and I learned that I was not a good listener. And he said, I focused in on that. I became an active listener, and it made me a better leader. And that's adaptation. That's the willingness to change. That's the willingness to listen and learn and be taught. Question number 3, what do you look for in a potential leader? I asked that question. And once again, here's a list of things. For me, it was all about the culture. It was all about trying to find a person that's a fit, that's coachable and teachable, and most important of all, is willing to do the work. And when I found that individual, I mentored them and coached them and pushed them along. And then what you see here is very similar in their responses to me. The one I want to call out is a very high EQ. And she told me, she's a CEO, she said, it's not the IQ that matters, it's the EQ. It's being self-aware, not self-actualized. That makes the difference for her in a potential leader. Then the last question was, how do you teach a dragon? How do you teach that? What do you have to do? What are the steps in that progression? And for me, it was about mentoring. It was about telling stories about how to get better or how I made my mistakes and how I corrected them. But it's also experiential. Give them an opportunity to succeed and fail, but be there to catch them. Those are the things I learned, and this is what the people told me, the 15 individuals. And so last, what are the learnings? The learnings are this. Leadership is learned. It's taught and experiential. It's not innate. It's not a talent. Leadership is universal. It trans over businesses and professions. Once you've mastered it or begun to master it, you're good to go. And leadership is a lifelong learning and education. Just as you do CMEs, you need to do CLEs. Continue leadership education. And leadership sets your culture. Commit to it, own it, and become a great and positive leader. Thank you.
Introduce Erica Mitchell from the University of Tennessee, who's going to tell us about perspectives on negative and destructive leadership.
Thank you. I'm going to discuss the research behind what makes a negative or destructive leader and the evidence that has and work that has been done in this area. I have no disclosures. So when we think about the impact of a leader, it's really important for retention. Several surveys have been conducted, and they've shown that almost half of people leave a company because of their leader, and 1/3 of people think about leaving because of a leader. So in essence, what really causes the highest amount of stress for us at work is our bosses. So the old adage, people don't quit companies, they quit their bosses, is true. What makes up poor leadership or bad leadership or toxic leadership? They differ. Bad leadership may be someone who's not a very good communicator or someone who doesn't provide good recognition. Studies have shown that 50% of workforce say that in the last year, their bosses haven't told them they've done a good job. Or someone with unreasonable expectations, or the micromanager. We all know how difficult that can be. And ineffective leadership can be those leaders that lack vision or strategic thinking. They avoid conflict, and they lack credibility. And they also tolerate the incompetent. But what differentiates poor and ineffective leadership from toxic leadership is the personal targeting of the person by the toxic leader. These leaders take all the credit. They're known for their angry tirades. They publicly shame you, and they insult you. So that's very different because it's not task-oriented, it's personal. And 15 to 30% of leaders manage in this style. So what are the negative effects of toxic bosses? They create an environment where the productivity is lower, the job satisfaction is lower, organizational commitment is impaired, and helping behavior is impaired. There's much higher incidence in the workers of stress and burnout, healthcare problems, and what's important, people start behaving deviantly. They steal from their companies, they have no respect for their workplace, and they have bad behavior. And in terms of health, 25% of workers with a bad or toxic boss have heart disease, and this percent increases the longer that you work with your toxic employee. And it's like a virus. Not only are you feeling this at work, but you go home and you take it out on your dog, you take it out on your spouse, and you can even take it out on your kids. So a lot of research has been done in how to survive a toxic boss and how to get through it. But what are the components or the root cause of someone who's a toxic leader? Well, they're not put on this earth as jerks. And unfortunately, there's not much evidence to support that there's genetic traits in it. And when you look at personality disorders, there are some personality disorders that have an association or correlation with abusive supervision, but that's not the first thing that you think about. We are all possible toxic leaders. And it's something that you were not aware of, but it certainly can be an environment where this occurs. And I'm going to talk about this. So factors contributing to the toxic leadership are 3. Tolerance for it in the workplace, psychological power, and drained emotional and cognitive resources. We're all capable of it. So tolerance for it in the workplace. Studies have shown that if you're a toxic leader but are producing at high outcomes, so you're doing the things that your company wants you to do, you're not considered as toxic as the person who has low outcomes. In fact, what happens is that we reframe the behavior of the toxic leader. We say that, oh, they're a strong personality, they're a perfectionist, they just tell it as it is. Meanwhile, the person who has the low productivity is considered a horrible boss, a bully, and someone who needs anger management. And what about those bosses that are remorseful when they behave badly? Does that change your mind about them? Evidence supports that you should not trust these bosses that are mean to you and then they come back to you and say, oh, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean it, because they're just faking nice. And there are certainly some studies that support that. So don't fall for it. And obviously, there are some toxic bosses that can get away with it, but if you look at it, 37 of 51,000 leaders performed at the highest level but had the lowest likability. So the odds are 1 in 2,000. So psychological power is important too. We know that power is operationally defined as having control over resources, which affords ability to influence others by bestowing or withholding those resources. And when you abuse this power and you're corrupt and you use it in a self-serving fashion, you can, in effect, change your behavior to withhold information from your employees, control them in whatever way you can, and promote incompetent workers. In essence, you're transforming the group interactions. And what about the one that we're all susceptible to as surgeons? drained emotional and cognitive resources. We know that there are many factors that drain our cognition, mental fatigue. And so mental fatigue and family work and conflict cause resource depletion and toxic leadership. That is something that we can control internally, but it is much better if your workplace has external restraints that sanction against aggression. So both need to be in play. And what about the toxic triad of destructive leadership? This is a really interesting area that you really need these three components to have a toxic work environment with a toxic leader. And this research looked at the characteristics of destructive leaders and as well as conducive environments that put their followers, make them susceptible to creating this chasm or environment of a destructive leader. And the 5 features of destructive leadership is that seldom, absolutely, or entirely destructive, as both good and bad results occur in these situations. The process is of dominance, coercion, and manipulation instead of influence, persuasion, and commitment. And it's a very selfish orientation where the leader does things entirely for themselves. And the outcomes can result in a compromise in the quality of life for the constituents and detract from the organizational purpose, but it does not exclusively result as the result of only the leader. So in academia, the toxic triad of destructive leadership would be as such. When you think about the traditional leadership, it's a hierarchical, it's top, bottom to bottom passage of information. The leaders control the values and standards and systems and processes. The followers live in this traditional constructs where they have established norms of behavior, sort of tribal behaviors, and their promotion is dependent on leaders. And the environment, of course, is top-down appraisal system, output-focused, and there's a lot of unconscious bias. So in academia, you've got this, milieu of the leaders, environment, and followers, but what makes it toxic is when the destructive leaders abuse their power. Clearly, they're gatekeepers. They have hierarchical control. They manipulate the standards and values and the systems and loyalties. And that in combination with a conducive environment where the checks and balances are aligned to the chain of command and the top-down appraisal system, and where the followers are susceptible to doing what they're told to do and avoid whistleblowing because they're afraid of their future and their future careers. So how do you fix it? In a nutshell, fix yourself first. Make sure your resources are replenished. Think collaboration, not power. And make sure you're in an environment or set and enforce clear expectations. So great leaders fix toxic cultures, and I know my partners up here will be talking about that. And the old adage, we can talk about this later, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. Thank you.
So our next speaker doesn't really need much of an introduction. He's the SVS Executive Director, Ken Slaw, who's going to give his approach to what he started as the leadership course at SVS.
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here, a pleasure and an honor to be the Executive Director of the SVS. So just by way of introduction to everybody, I come to this work as an educator, as a psychologist, and that's the approach that I apply to this topic of leadership as well. I've served now in medical societies at an executive level for 30 years, and for 25 of those 30 years, I've been bringing physicians through formal leadership development and skill training. And I've had the opportunity now to work with over 3,000 physicians through the various programs over the course of my career in the leadership curriculum. I'd like you to take a very quick look at this word cloud. So the SVS, in collaboration with SCVS and VES, has started a leadership program a few years ago. Every cohort that goes through the program, we ask them to complete a word cloud exercise. And this is the compilation of what vascular surgeons, yes, vascular surgeons, tell us about their aspirations for leadership. It's about balance. It's about seeking fulfillment. It's about being happier. It's about really learning how to be an effective leader. It's about being challenged and productive in your careers. And so this is a reflection of your inner insights into where you would all like to be as leaders through your peers. The SVS Leadership Development Program was established in 2019. As I said, it's a collaboration between SCVS and VES. We now have had 117 vascular surgeons that have completed the program. It was developed through a unique and committed member-staff collaboration. Leadership is universal. This is one area where we're all students, and we all get to learn together and share our experience with one another. I want to thank the Leadership Development Committee of the SVS. I brought a lot of the science and a lot of the curriculum for leadership to the SVS, but I have no idea how best to apply it to the challenges that you're all facing every single day. And so tremendous help and support and just gratitude for the Leadership Development Committee of the SVS, many of whom are in the room today, and I really appreciate that and your support. In fact, those of you that have been through the leadership program or are on the committee, if you could just raise your hand so everybody can recognize you, that would be great. Dr. Manuel Garcia Toco is the chair, the current chair of the leadership committee. So if you have any complaints, please see Dr. Garcia Toco. Our program has faculty each year. We have a core faculty that presents different elements of our program, and then we select mastery grant recipients out of each cohort to help with our peer mentoring and facilitative aspects of the leadership program, because as Perry said, it really is experiential. And so having these focus groups is really important in these breakout groups for experiential learning. The goals of the program: first and foremost, to accelerate vascular surgeons to reach their full potential as leaders. This is another skill set. This is another discipline. You spend all of this time and energy focusing on your clinical skills, and then you get frustrated when you can't make organizational and system change to better help your patients. This is the other set of skills that you need. This is the other discipline that you need. In terms of making change and being effective change agents. And secondly, to enable vascular surgeons to make the positive impact that you want to make in the field and in all of the rest of your endeavors. These are our CME educational objectives. We really focus on functional day-to-day behaviors that drive success. Make sure that all of our cohort members understand the larger context and settings in which to apply leadership, when to lead, and when to manage is really a critical element of our training. And as Perry mentioned, it's experiential. So we really focus on experiential leadership. And we also try to make sure every cohort member leaves energized, recharging their batteries, and remembering the why. What got them involved and excited about vascular surgery in the first place, so they go off leading with energy. Why is this such a challenge? Well, it would be great if we could wave a magic wand and have the entire world break the way that we want it to break. But the truth is, every single day, there's a million obstacles in the way of leadership. Lack of vision, unclear goals, team sizes, many of the things Dr. Mitchell just took us through. No accountability, warring departments, toxic cultures, misaligned values. So the key to working through all of these challenges to leadership is to develop this other skill set to help you mitigate and work through these issues. So what does the literature, what does science really tell us about leadership? Well, in brief, let me just highlight a couple of very important points. First and foremost, leadership begins and ends inside of you. It's your energy, it's your purpose, it's your vision, it's what you're trying to accomplish. Secondly, what leadership research tells us is, at the essence, leadership is built from a core of character and credibility, first and foremost. It's the only thing worth dying over in leadership. You have to maintain your core of integrity and credibility. Do what you say you're going to do. Follow through and be consistent. Interestingly, leadership is measured not by your opinion of yourself, but the opinion of those around you. because the goal of leadership is to move others. It's to move people. So others around you will determine how successful a leader you actually are. The most important point I'd like to emphasize is that leadership is not, N-O-T, position, title, or power. These are tools of influence that leaders leverage to get things done. How you choose to leverage position, title, or power determine how successful you'll be as a leader. It's defined by a constellation of behaviors, and leadership is about strategic alignment and energy flow. You always know you're leading when you're exchanging energy with your colleagues, your peers, and other groups of people. It's about relationships. It's about people. So, if you do the research that Perry did and ask 4 questions of a bunch of leaders, and you multiply that by 3 million, you get Kouzes and Posner's study of leadership, that they wrote the book, The Leadership Challenge. Over 3 million people across 40 nations were asked what leadership is and what defines leadership success. And after 30 years, the same 5 things come up time and time again. It's about honesty, being forward-looking, having a vision, competent, able to get across the goal line, inspiring, and intelligent. And I have always found it heartening. You do not have to be mature or self-controlled in order to be a great leader. These are the critical skill sets that we do teach in our program. And so you can see in the Kouzes and Posner model, there are 5 practice areas, and we cover these skill sets in each of the program. If you're looking for the good 90-minute read, the Kouzes and Posner book is a long read. It'll put you to sleep. But if you're looking for the quick summary, their book, The Truth About Leadership, is probably your best resource to sum up 30 years of research on leadership. Bottom line is, people move our world. Leadership moves people. And so the key to leadership is emotional intelligence, and it's all that soft stuff. And so we focus a lot in our program on teaching the soft stuff. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness, self-regulation, being motivational, being empathic. And there's an overall physics of leadership, and this is what I would encourage you to do, is to take on leadership like you've taken on vascular surgery. Figure out how it works, the physics of leadership, and if you master this physics, you're going to be a master of change in your environment. We teach this through a macro educational model of experiential learning, skill development, and practice, and we focus in 4 areas. We do a lot of exploration of self, how to move others successfully from one position to another, how to move organizational and large system change, and how to get results. And we have a toolkit that we developed that we teach in the program. Just to close for the last couple of slides here, this is the curriculum for our program. This is a 7-month event for everybody that goes through the cohort. Each session features pre-reading, pre-exercise, a 20 to 30-minute didactic, followed by 45 minutes of facilitated peer mentoring and discussion over the tools and the skill sets that we're working on that particular week. This coming weekend is actually our live session. So we're all leaving here and going to balmy Chicago to do our live event for the program. We have a case study that everybody in the program completes to help the experiential learning. And we have now a cohort led by Babak Abai, who's also at this meeting, leading our LDP research subcommittee. So we're starting to study ourselves in terms of developing vascular surgery research that we'd like to publish in JVS. The impact of the LDP, I'll just leave you with this as my last slide. 82% of those completing strongly agree the experience has changed their life, and 100% agree or strongly agree. And you can see the kind of difference that this is making in the 117 vascular surgeons that have completed the program. Our next cohort will begin in the fall, so I encourage all of you that haven't participated in this program to please do so. And thank you thank you for all you do for patients and for vascular surgery. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and to serve you.
Well, Ken, thank you. You were almost on time. Not quite you yet.
Oh?
No. It's okay. So actually, the next talk is a recorded talk from Australia. Nadia Wise, who I had the pleasure of meeting some years back, and I was very impressed by the way they actually activate leadership training very early, actually in medical school, and then really progress them throughout the course of their training. So hopefully we can get that talk up and running.
Good afternoon. Thank you to Jean and the organising team for asking me to give this talk today. I had hoped to be there with you in person, but rather ironically, I've had to stay home to step into the head of surgery role at my institution while the clinical director takes some leave. I have no disclosures. Well, here I am in Adelaide, South Australia, literally 10,000 miles from where you are. So how did it happen that I'm here in South Australia acting as clinical director of surgery rather than being there with you in Miami? I'll share my story with you shortly. But first I want to draw your attention to the artwork as the background of my slides. This is the artwork by the Kaurna people, the traditional owners of the land I live and work on and whom I pay my respects to today and every day. One of the things I've realised is how important storytelling is in Aboriginal culture. It is through the telling of stories that wisdom and leadership is practiced. And this is also true for clinical leaders. Storytelling is one of the most powerful means we have as leaders to influence, teach and inspire those we work with. So let me tell you my story. I finished medical school in 2002, did my internship 2003, completed 8 years of surgical training and became a consultant in 2012. I had the first of my 2 daughters in 2014 and the second in 2016. My children certainly keep me very grounded. In 2015, I was asked to join our Network's Clinical Review Committee as a relatively junior surgeon, but to represent the Division of Surgery on this peak governance committee. Whilst going through a challenging time in the vascular unit, which is a story for another day, I really began to enjoy and revel in the work I was doing to improve the quality and safety of our patients through systems improvements. I quickly realised that this was my passion and I just wanted to be part of making things better, and probably the reason I entered medicine in the first place. I was then asked to chair the committee by the outgoing chair, and around the same time I was asked to be a National Fellowship Examiner for Vascular Surgery, one of the first 2 women in Australia and New Zealand to do so. I sat down at this time with a colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Conor Marin, who co-convened the conference with me when we invited John as our keynote speaker. We talked about both of our futures and mapped out a path to get there. And this was in 2018, and I decided that my 5 to 10 year goal was to be the Director of Surgery. The map included completing formal leadership training, and I've listed some of the things I've done here. Not all of these are medical. The company director's course, for example, is designed for business executives, but I learned so much about governance from this and how I could apply this to my hospital roles. I've had formal training in change management, difficult conversations, listening, and management of challenging situations, to name a few. All of my leadership training's been self-directed. There is no leadership program as such here in Australia. However, I have had the full support of my clinical director and head of unit to do these things. Until very recently, I have not held a formal leadership position in my organisation, but through my commitment and behaviours, I am told I'm a respected and key clinical leader here. I think my story demonstrates how we do things in Australia. There is no formal program nor model. We're slowly moving from those traditional pathways to leadership to a better model. And I'm not sure how things are done in the US, but in Australia, this is definitely how things have happened in the past. I'm sure we can all think of people in leadership roles who got there one of these ways. Some of them are good, some of them are not so good, and it's a bit hit and miss, and it's really particularly old-fashioned now. What we're moving to, and this is the contemporary model here in Australia, is really threefold. It's assessment of leadership competencies throughout medical school and training years, opportunities, and formal training. The College of Surgeons, or the Royal Australasian College of Surgeons, is the recognised body for standards and training for surgical practice in Australia and New Zealand. And on behalf of the Australian Medical Council and the Medical Board of Australia, is entrusted to conduct training and education of surgeons in each of the 9 surgical specialties. From this, we can see that the 10 RACS competencies for surgical training, there are 10 RACS competencies, one of which is leadership and management. And I'm really pleased that our college has recognised the importance of this and how it's essential to training and to the practising surgeon. And I think it is fantastic that it's recognised. However, we do have some way to go before we really have worked out how we can assess this throughout our training. Leadership opportunities present every day, and they really start from the get-go. My girls are getting leadership opportunities at school even, and they're only 7 and 8. I encourage you all to take as many opportunities as you can, be it signing up to represent on a committee and actively participating in the work, putting your hand up to be part of a steering group for a significant body of work for something you're passionate about. Be the ear for your colleagues to talk to and help them find their way. All of these are opportunities to practice your skills. But now we get to the crux of it all, training. Training is not just emulating the behaviour of those around us or learning by osmosis or doing things the way they've always been done. Training is a deliberate process. It's about being deliberate about desired goals and outcomes through deliberate practice and thought. We've all trained extensively to be in our positions as specialist vascular and endovascular surgeons, but have we been trained in leadership? And I think the answer for many, if not most, is no. So what is leadership training? It's a combination of things. It's workshops, it's seminars, it's conferences, online courses, immersive courses, mentorship, and practicing the skills. Training is really self-awareness. It is the development of interpersonal skills and frameworks on which to base crucial conversations, to lead effective change, to manage and elevate people, and to navigate challenging situations. So when should leadership training start? Well, it really depends. Some people are absolutely born as natural leaders, but even then they need to be trained. Leadership experience should and does start early in Australia. As I say, even my daughters do this at school. Competencies and some early skills develop in medical school, but particularly as a junior doctor, leading the team, working with multidisciplinary teams, rostering, managing competing priorities is all part of leadership experience and opportunity. Formal training in leadership is essential, but probably best reserved for those established in their careers who are the right people, those who are going to take the organisation forward and can bring people with them. And as a final point, we've talked about when leadership training starts, but I think it is just as important that it never stops. Continuous improvement of leadership behaviours is vital. Thank you very much for your time today. I've really enjoyed it. Apologies that I can't be there. It'd be great to meet you in the future. Bye.
Well, this was a wonderful talk, and now we're going to move on to Dr. Murray Shames from the University of South Florida, who's going to tell us about the leadership journey, a do-it-yourself approach to leadership training.
Thank you, everybody. That's a tough act to follow. That video was excellent. So really, Jean asked me to talk about the do-it-yourself approach to leadership training, and I just thought about it actually on the flight over, and it really should be the just do it approach to leadership training. So I wanted to start with my journey, and over the past 2 decades, I've had great opportunities. There's been lots of times where I've had to do the work, and I've learned to develop some skills that have led to my current role as chair of a department. I'm a huge advocate for leadership development since I feel it's something that we can all learn to do better, and it's not part of our surgical training, as we just heard. So I'm going to talk about my journey, some leadership training opportunities, the lessons learned, and leadership in practice. Our panelists have talked about the good and the bad, and so I just wanted to, this is one of my favorite quotes from Teddy Roosevelt from the Citizens in the Republic from 1910. In this speech, he recognizes those who strive to do great things, even if they may fail or face criticism from others. Roosevelt emphasizes the importance of taking action and being willing to put oneself out there, rather than standing on the sidelines as a spectator. He also speaks to the inevitability of encountering obstacles and failures, which we've all had in our lives, but encourages individuals to persist in the face of adversity. It's an apropos journey to my leadership development. I imagine that, like many of you, I was this guy as a senior resident and junior faculty member. I thought I was smart, I was well-trained, and entitled me to act in a certain way and expect that people would follow. Fortunately, I had the opportunity over many years to work on national societies, participate in conferences, meetings, been given positions of leadership where you learned volunteerism and commitment and core values. I was engaged locally at my medical school on lots of hospital committees, worked in the division, worked on the department. And this led to academic promotion and local and regional recognition. I built relationships, developed networks, and positions of influence. But along with all of that takes a commitment to learning. And again, we've all talked about this and heard this already today, but a leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding the potential in people and process and has the courage to develop that potential. And that's not what it takes early in a career. And I think the transition from being an active clinical physician and somebody who wants to work hard to stepping into that role as a leader requires wanting to help other people more. As a junior, as a college and high school student, I was not a star. I didn't make captain of the team. I wasn't a leader. But thinking back, I didn't really try that hard to do that. I wasn't really looking out for other people. I built a reputation nationally. I worked harder. I started an aortic program. I became more involved in leadership in the department with clinical research and operations. And I looked at a bunch of jobs, and you have to really make hard decisions about what's important. I think from some of the reading, you can see that there's different kinds of leadership styles, and different kinds of styles are required at different times over your career. You need to be authoritative sometimes and coercive other times. You need to be affiliative and democratic. You need to be somebody who builds consensus, and you're somebody who has to make really critical decisions, and almost always you have to work to be a coach. One of my favorite books is this 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which really talks about the building of trust and loyalty, that you really can't build a team without trust and people being willing to make hard decisions and have difficult conversations. There has to be real, honest conflict to be able to get commitment. And then you have to hold people accountable for what they're expected to do, and only then will you get results. In my meetings now, I always ask for dissent. I don't allow anybody to leave a room without at least disagreeing and causing, leading to conversation and getting everybody to have a voice. Because many times there's silence, and then when you leave the room, then there's all the discussion and the dissent starts. So I've had the opportunity to participate in some formal leadership training. My first formal course was in 2007. I was sent to the USF Leadership Institute, and thinking back, I'm not quite sure if that was my chair recognizing my arrogance and thinking I needed formal coaching, or his, recognizing a leadership potential a decade or so later. When I became division chief, I attended the surgical leadership program at Harvard, and it addresses many of the same things that the SVS does. Communication skills, handling conflict, building strategy, developing trust. And then I like to use our program that we have at USF: authenticity, transparency, kindness, and vulnerability. While the authoritative leadership program development that we've sort of all went through in the hierarchical surgery training has existed for many, many decades, we've heard over and over today how that just doesn't work anymore. There needs to be collaboration. There needs to be teamwork. We need to respect everyone on the team. So really, what I've learned from reading and from the formal courses is be authentic, live your values, and having really clear values and communicating that. Be self-aware that emotional intelligence is critical. Focus on fairness and equity. Listen more. Really, that is probably the most critical information I can share today. Talk less, listen more. And delegate. Trust people. Almost everyone wants to help. Learn to communicate. You have to have conflicts, but you don't want to be mean. You learn to collaborate outside of your organization, outside of your institution, outside of your division, outside of your partners. Plan more, but take risks. Everyone can be replaced. People want to be valued. Let go of your ego, and culture drives results. Leadership for me has been less like a ladder and a little bit more like a climbing wall. I participated and had opportunities at many national societies I'm going to bring up VES, where I held every position but one on the executive committee and never got to be the president despite 10 or 15 years. I'm not bitter. I did the work. I enjoyed it. I really did, but part of that was timing. At the APDVS, I ran for president 3 times and didn't get it the first time. The first time I applied to be division chief at USF, I was not selected. So be resilient, be persistent, live by your values. If you want something, work hard for it. Mentorship is sort of getting to the end, critically important. This is Dick Carl. He was my chair when I was hired. He's a good friend. He's also a pilot. And he says that a good leader should possess a combination of technical competence, passion, communication skills, confidence, humility, and a willingness to learn. And that applies to both pilots and surgeons. You couldn't do any of this without mentorship and guidance, and good friends and colleagues have really led the way and helped me get to where I am. So really, what I tell my kids is don't peak in high school. I became division chief. I was president of the APDVS. I became chair of a department. I'm chief of staff, and I'm the president of the Florida Vascular Society. Really, leadership is really being not about you anymore. It's creating vision, setting expectations and accountability, professional development, transparency and inclusion, mentorship and fairness. I see that. So what am I doing now? We've started a leadership program for our residents. They have a course that's every month, run by our business school and by our People Development Institute. I require all my faculty to go through formal leadership training, both at the SVS and other societies. We're developing a healthcare MBA program at USF. So be accountable, be engaged. Leadership comes from experience and training. Build relationships and develop influence. Mentorship and organizational support are critical, and sometimes it's really about timing. My good friend Albert Einstein. Try not to become a man of success, but rather become a man of value. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. I'll invite Audra Duncan from the Western University in London, Ontario, Canada, The Leadership Journey for Women in Vascular Surgery, Changing the Course to Mitigate Negative Impacts and Inspire Women to Lead. Thank you, Audra.
Thank you, John, and the SCVS for allowing me to talk about this. I won't repeat that title because it's super long. I don't have anything to disclose, but we always start with the why. Why are we talking about this? Well, I think you'll see in a couple more slides that we're not quite there yet with vascular surgery and in women leaders. So I strongly believe that recruitment and retention is the cornerstone of our specialty, and I think it's one of the pillars for the SVS strategic board, and this is what we want. But if you just look at the numbers, our future is a 50% or more medical school pool. So if we want to see these highly qualified candidates come and choose our specialty, they have to see more leaders. So about 5 years ago, my daughter was about 10 years old, I was about to get up on the podium, and I sent a picture of a boardroom like this, and I texted it to her. I said, I'm about to give my talk, and she texted me back and she said, well, where are the girls? Because they weren't there. I mean, there aren't that many of them. They didn't stand out. And so it's just to keep reminding us that our young people are looking, they're watching, and they want to see a leadership that looks like them. So there are a lot of other reasons, and each one of these things on this slide is an aspect of leadership that you can find data on for either medical literature or business literature that show that women leaders provide these in equal or better qualities as leaders. And I think that we should think about that, not to create a male versus female battle, but this is really to say not to be overlooked as a woman who's coming up as a leader. And that's the whole point of DEI. And I'll repeat that multiple times, I think, in this talk. So how is vascular surgery doing? There are some papers on it. This was from 2021. SVS committees looked really good. If you look at the baseline is about 14% women vascular surgeons to choose from, but we're not doing as well with division chiefs or editorial boards. This paper, however, if you look at the This is all surgical conferences from 2014 to 2018. And SBS is all the way to the left in terms of the green bar for executive leadership. Now, in fairness, that was 2018, and I think SBS has made a commitment to change where we are on this line. But obviously, we have some work to do. And this is a paper from Dr. Humphreys looking at representation of women in vascular surgery science and societies, looking at 5 regional and 5 national societies, and found that there was probably, again, more work to do overall looking at society leadership, senior authors, and committee chairs. So where do we go from there? Personally, I feel like you have to define what your leadership journey is and your goals. Maybe it's CEO, maybe it's division chief, and so on. But I would maintain that everyone in this room is a team leader. You have to be the leader of your patient care. And I think a lot of women especially get derailed by not either being seen as the team leader in their ORs or in their hospitals. And they really kind of need to learn how to be a leader, even if none of those other roles like program director or chief is in their future. They have to lead kind of in their own space. And how I think about it, a good leader and what I aspire to be is deliberate, purposeful, and collaborative. And I want to have both a vision to lead in good times and the ability to deal with crises in bad times. So I have had leaders who just kind of sat back and let things happen until they had to put out fires, and I just don't think that that's a good combination. So what can derail us? And I think some of these things are for any gender, but specifically for women can affect them. Time and overcommitment. And I hear this time and time again from women who say, I was offered this spot, I don't want to say no because I'll never get asked again. And that's really unfortunate, because if you don't have the time to do it and you do a bad job, you will also never get asked to do it again. So you have to choose wisely and make sure that you can do a great job when you're in that, whatever that role. And there's lots of other reasons why you might not get a leadership role. It could be just legacy. People might be uncomfortable with a woman in that role. And sometimes there's 10 really great people for a job. There's a bottleneck. 9 of them are men, and just statistically, it's just not going to happen. I'm going to show a little video clip. I'm going to talk a little bit about some negative things that can happen. I don't know how many of you know the show The Good Place on Netflix, and it's one of my favorite shows if you've never seen it. But it takes place in heaven, and in heaven apparently you eat a lot of frozen yogurt, and you could get absolutely any flavor frozen yogurt you want. So I hope the sound is on, maybe.
This froyo is amazing, so I'm just going to roll with it.
What flavour did you get?
I got a twist. Half strawberry, half male co-worker gets called out for stealing your ideas.
Ooh, those go great together.
So it's funny because it's true, and I think probably everyone has in this room, no matter what gender, has probably have someone, kind of taken your ideas and represented it as their own. And I think you have to know in your head how you're going to manage that from the get-go. So the way I manage that is that I think, well, first of all, it's a compliment, right? I had such a great idea, someone wanted to repeat it. But you have to be open-minded and look at the room and say, well, maybe this person is doing that because they feel under pressure to produce ideas and they don't have anything to come up with, and so on. So I think in my leadership journey, I've tried to be curious and understanding of the people at the table and try to see it from their perspective. And again, the goal being not equality, but equity, that I don't want everyone at the room to look like me. I want people to not be overlooked if they look like me. So you have to decide where you can bend and what are your deal breakers. So again, how I focus myself and my leadership is to always be patient-centric, because I find that that's the way kind of to my true north. So, everything we're doing here really is patient-centric. The business of society, the business of delivering healthcare is all to be better at taking care of our patients. And so if we make our decisions based on that and choose our leaders based on that, I think that we'll end up with a good product and a legacy of vascular surgery that's going to go on the next 50 years. We've heard a lot about leadership training. I'm not going to go specifically into that other than to recommend that anybody who's interested in any kind of leadership role should get engaged in a formal training because there's so many opportunities for that. Use coaches, especially if you have new roles. Rely on your mentors. I still use my mentors that I've had for 25 years. If you're lucky enough to have a good sponsor, do the work, make them proud. They will again and again sponsor you. And then when you're in the leadership roles, you got to do your homework. So when I'm in my hospital, I never ask for anything without knowing all my data so that, I can be perceived as someone who knows their stuff and that I'm very prepared. I also think it's really wise for the women in the room and everyone else to use supports. For the women, there's the SVS Women's section, that's my plug, the WhatsApp, social medias, and I use my partners as support as well. So bring something to the conversation. You cannot rely on DEI to get you a leadership position. This DEI is not meant for personal gain. It's for a systematic change in the system. And then finally, I think we have to model our behavior. So if you're going to be a woman in a leadership role, you want to be someone who wants your mentor or mentees to surpass you. And you want to model behavior for them that's going to be excellent. And then you need to sponsor them. Women are under-sponsored and over-mentored. And so we need to keep bringing up those women once we are able to achieve those leadership positions. And finally, always go back to the patient. Elevate those who look up to you and support your current women leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duncan, for this outstanding talk. We're going to move on to Dr. Tejera from University of Texas at Austin, who's going to talk about applying leadership in everyday opportunities and challenges.
Okay, so these are my disclosures. Also disclosures, I too took the surgical leadership course. For me, it took 2 years because of COVID. Excellent opportunity. Here's some important books, and no leadership talk is complete without some book recommendations. But I think it is important because formal leadership training and literature, they provide you with a language. And having access to that language is important to better articulate your goals and your strategies when the time comes to it. So the goal with this talk is not to make you a CEO, is not to provide you a pathway to become a division chief or even a department chair. This talk is actually providing you with some tools that can be applied both in private practice and academic medicine. This is the location where I'm the most comfortable, and I think that resonates with most of the audience. This is where I'm happy. This is my element. Operating with my graduating chief resident, this is what we do and we are comfortable doing. But this is an important environment. We need to be present here. Executive suites are the places where decisions are made. Those people need to be familiar with you. The first time you're giving your elevator pitch, asking for more operating room time, asking for that hybrid room that you know your team deserves, that should not be the first time these people in this room are hearing you talk. They need to be familiar with you. And there's a process for that. Your reputation is everything. And you need absolutely to be intentional on how you build it. Be smart on how not only you have your track record, but how you portray it, how you advertise it so it becomes known. With that in mind, several different leadership models, I would say that I follow the prestige leadership, and is a way that I think is very efficient for you to succeed and apply significant strategies for this goal. A prestigious status is given by the followers. It takes a lot of work, but you become recognized. Prestige leaders, they influence others by displaying signs of wisdom and expertise and being a role model. It does take a lot of work. You have to walk the talk. You have to set the example, and you have to take over that elder status amongst your team and become the elder of the village. And let's talk a little bit about power. Power has a very negative connotation. It has become a dirty word. And the followers, they appreciate when they notice that power is not the primary motivation of a leader. But you need to have power to do good. It's important to make change. You need to have access to power. And if you have power, use it wisely and constructively. Use your reputation. Occupy those spaces, and reaching power, use it to do good. So going back to the operating room, we need to distinguish ourselves as problem solvers. And as vascular surgeons, we are particularly well positioned to do so. We need to leverage unique aspects of vascular surgery and embrace our role of supporting other specialties. I'm proud of the fact that I navigate across operating rooms from neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, interventional radiology. We as a specialty are one of the few that can do that and be seen as someone that's there to help. That will significantly increase your reputation in your institution, and you become an asset. And as people recognize you as someone who is out there helping others, they immediately become more willing to help you with your cause. So in a way, you can be selfish about it. Altruism in this case serves you well. And then you become someone that can influence, that can change culture, that can change mentality. And then when you go back to the C-suite, after establishing your reputation in the operating room, when you pitch your case to the CEO, to the CFO, and all these COs around there, you will look around and you have OR directors, nursing directors, anesthesiologists, other surgeons that will recognize in you someone that's part of their cause also. They will recognize that you being successful will be beneficial to all of them, and they will support your cause. Your ability to execute your mission will be perceived as having a tangible collective benefit that will help you to be successful, and that will bring you a lot of fruits. So how to ascend to a leadership role? So what opportunities do we have? And that's very interesting, and I take it as a personal story because, in my own institution, I relied a lot on these strategies that I just mentioned to ascend in respect and in leadership positions. But we need to recognize there are many activities that are considered as chores that can be used as opportunities to amplify your institutional reputation and demonstrate your leadership skills. Things that we just consider mundane, you just need to go to that other committee, to that other meeting, but those are very important. So here are probably some of my top three. They are probably going to have different names in different institutions, but medical executive committee or any sort of staff committee, those are very important. Surgery council, quality improvement groups and initiatives. In these venues, you have a combination of people both from administration, people that have a hand on the money, on the resources, on the planning. You also have participation of clinicians from different specialties. This is the place where you can demonstrate that you're level-headed, that you recognize the importance of financial health, that you recognize priorities of the institution, and you can really make your case and have that face-to-face and become recognized and known by people in these environments. So, okay, I have to go to this meeting at noon every first Tuesday of the month for our medical executive committee. It sounds like a chore, but you will collect some benefits from those meetings. And then we have a lot of other opportunities: peer review committees, recruitment committees, multidisciplinary work groups, physician champion roles, clinical pathway lead roles. And again, the names are going to be different. They're going to be structured in different ways, but every institution is going to have an assembly of those types of meetings that you will be interacting with physicians from multiple specialties in different areas of the hospital, in different components of your healthcare system, that you will start working together to solve problems that are not necessarily patient care directly related problems, but you will become known and recognized among those peers as someone that has a lot to contribute. So in summary, prestige leadership is a successful and sustainable model. Remember, your reputation is everything. Intentional reputation building is a path for career in leadership. Be intentional, make it known, make people know what you're there for. And recognize leadership opportunities in routine activities. Like I said, some of these meetings, they may sound boring, they may sound just like a burden, but they will be important for your leadership role. Thank you.
Well, Jason Lee from Stanford is going to pull it all together in the title, Moving Toward an Optimal Leadership Growth Model in Vascular Surgery.
Great. Thanks, John, and thanks to the SCVS for the opportunity to close this session and hopefully stimulate some discussion. I've never paid attention so much during a session because I had to take notes about each thing. Usual disclosures, and just a shout out to the team that's continued to inspire me every day for the last 20 years at Stanford. So what I was charged to do was kind of wrap this up, and I know everybody in the room that's been listening probably from each talk, and you're supposed to, or you're taught that for each talk you're supposed to take one bullet point away. So hopefully you guys all have 8 bullet points in your mind of what you've taken away from the session. I'm going to add through my lens another bullet point for each of you all to take away. Perry. The phrase that resonated was create your value through experience, listen, and be vulnerable. Erica talked about a toxic triad of problems that can occur within leadership, having a destructive leader, susceptible followers, and a conducive environment. And I think in surgery, we're set up to fail in that way, and I think it's incumbent upon members in this room to break that triad and to find solutions for that. Ken talked about integrity and credibility as 2 of the main features of what a powerful and good leader does. He used the word honesty that showed up. He talked about emotional intelligence, and I'll get to that, and you'll see in the 5 slides that I made for this after a lot of similar themes. And I love really that societies are tackling the science of leadership and trying to arm us all with skill sets to be leaders within our own institutions and to help each other and to promote each other. Nadia, this was a different tact on it. I appreciated she was the only one that was under 8 minutes. It sounds like the Australian model is very similar. And what struck me is that this is a worldwide issue and question. And I think leadership and improving on how we work with each other transcends culture, probably transcends the English language. And I think particularly in this day and age, I think in all of our walks of life, we could learn from everything we've heard from these panelists. Murray, the courage to develop potential and wanting to help other people more. That's the definition of when you're ready to move on to a larger leadership role. I think we keep hearing over and over again, we can be leaders in our operating room. That's when we're in charge of that. For all of the folks in the room that aspire to next level leadership, it really is about wanting to help other people more. And I've personally learned that a lot from Murray over the 20 years of our friendship. Audra, curious about one of your last statements, and I love it because I've myself thought about this a lot. Women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. Never really thought of it that way, Audra, and really so many examples, probably for many of us in the room, where we think we're sponsoring, we're mentoring, we're giving advice, we're telling folks this is what you should do. And when push comes to shove, I think the sponsorship part is where we're going to make a difference so that Audra, your daughter, one day when she stands up here, looks out into the room and nobody notices that everybody looks like what the current population looks like. And finally, Pedro, really enjoyed that part. Your reputation is everything. Be intentional. Intentional is a word I told Dawn Coleman recently. She uses that word all the time. That's my favorite word. Whenever I hear the word intentional, I think of Dawn Coleman. Be intentional about how you build your reputation and use power when you're a leader to do good. I think that's an important distinction as you go through levels of leadership over time. A lot of you folks know that I ruptured both of my Achilles 5 years ago. Last year during my VES address, I talked about the legend of Achilles and how that translates to vascular surgery leadership. Many of you also know, as perhaps one of the hugest basketball fans in the room, two favorite players in the world, the late Kobe Bryant, who said when he ruptured his Achilles, that was his personal Mount Everest. Think of that. What's your personal Mount Everest out there, and how are you going to overcome that? Klay Thompson took 985 days off from work, tore his ACL. If you remember, we were at the VAM in Washington, D.C., Tom Forbes rooting for the Raptors, myself rooting for the Warriors, trying to get their third straight championship. He tore his ACL. He came all the way back from that, and then he ruptured his Achilles during preseason. 985 days later, came back to work. So what is your own Achilles heel? We think about this as weaknesses that we have. These are slides I took from my VES talk. These weaknesses, we think of ourselves as what shapes what our life should look like, and we always consider ourselves what are our things that limit us. I think if you want to make improvement in your own life, you need to consider making a change about those weaknesses and embrace those. We should all acknowledge we're not good at everything. We're all going to make mistakes. Recovery and adaptation to that is going to be the key to our own success. Brene Brown keeps coming up. There's a list of books I don't actually read. These are the only two books I've read in the last couple of years, Brene Brown books. Courage building skills that make up brave leadership. Vulnerability, that word keeps coming up. Act with integrity, productive and honest conversations, and move on quickly from failure. We associate vulnerability in each of us with emotions we want to avoid. There was a talk earlier today about sort of the M&M process in education, fear, shame, uncertainty. I would like to propose, after reading these two books the last couple of years, do not believe that vulnerabilities are actually our weakness. I think it can be where we turn that weakness into joy, belonging, creativity, authenticity, and love. And only when we take off whatever shield we have to sound like we're going to be strong, that we're going to go on to the next case, but we're able to reflect on these experiences, does that bring then purpose and meaning to our other lives outside of vascular surgery? And I think that's when innovation happens, adaptability, accountability, and then we have teams of leaders that are better. The word emotional intelligence comes up a lot, and I'll leave you with this thought. Emotional intelligence, we've talked about emotional quotient, somebody brought up self-awareness, self-regulation, social awareness, social skills, self-motivation. I want to introduce the folks that hadn't heard me say the word before, and my team knows this. Emotional stamina is the word that I like to use. And that's emotional intelligence, but over your career, weathering the ups and downs of training, clinical practice, academics, privatemics, patient interactions, family life, and all of your personal issues. So really, is there such a thing as, to answer the question for my talk, is there an optimal growth leadership model? I think the diversity of the panel, the diversity of the people in the room, there's not a one-size-fits-all. There doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all. Listening is key. I've had to learn about this my whole time and really accelerated in the last 18 months. Leadership can be learned. I think it is experiential. And I think to grow our specialty and to continue to attract the best and brightest, we leaders need to evolve how we lead. I think of, and my trainees know this, every thought I have or every decision I make now is through the lens of how's it going to make the trainees better, because those are the folks that make a difference and are going to be the ones that have to take care of me. And then I still want to thank folks like John, who have been our daily contact folks for vascular leadership issues across the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. That was a great summation. And again, I appreciate all the speakers who clearly put a lot of effort into this session. The session is open for questions if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll just start with my own. Really, one of the things that I keep hearing from everybody is really trust and accountability. I'd sort of ask all of you, maybe answer sort of how do you really enforce that in your way, in your leadership models? How do you actually make yourself accountable and the people you're leading accountable on those levels?
So I think you can't do either of those until you set very clear expectations. I think, you can sort of, it's like parenting, right? You can't yell at your kid for not cleaning up the room if the kid didn't know they were supposed to clean up the room or, clear the dishes, right? So very clear expectations of why people are there. And then I think getting the right people in the room, like why are they there in the first place, right? So shared vision, clear expectations, and only then can you hold people accountable. You can't hold people accountable who didn't know what they're expected to do.
I agree, but on top of that, what I've learned on accountability, it's not a tool to hit somebody with. It's to help them. And if so you come from that angle, I'm here to help you, I'm here to make you better, and you approach it from that area, it's no longer just accountability, you're coaching and you're moving them along. So it's all those things that you wrap into it, has been my experience.
I'd add role modeling.
Palma?
I really appreciated all the presentations. They were really outstanding. And I think as a female who's trained 19 years ago, I went into practice and have had 3 different jobs. I've had some mentors, I've had very few supporters, and I've had some good and bad bosses. So it goes both ways. And I think that, what I find interesting is that as you've described what we're doing now or where we can be going, where do you feel we really are on the spectrum of getting to where we need to be? Because I feel like we're really at the beginning of this. I'd just like to know where everybody where would you say we are on a scale of 1 to 10? Are we at a 2 or are we at a 5?
I think everybody's on an individual journey. Every single person that has come into the leadership program and every physician that I've worked with in the last 30 years of my career in medical society knew something about leadership and leading, started a journey, at a different place. The thing that they've all had in common is incredible passion for patient care, for quality, for doing the right thing. And I think that I think Jason and Murray both brought up interesting observations that formal surgical training, formal medical training doesn't give you this very important skill set. And I think what the societies are trying to do is trying to fill that gap. And I think now it's great to see individual training programs trying to do this well. I would just suggest that what we need to do is create a collective where we all do this together so that we can really push it forward together. And to answer your question, Dr. Shaw, I think where we are right now in my assessment as a collective is we're around a 2-3 compared to optimally where we could be. And I don't think it would take us long to get there if we all row together.
Dr. Caligaro?
Yeah, thank you. Last night during dinner, the gentleman standing behind me, Dr. Fred Weaver, and I had a kind of a long personal discussion tangentially related to this. And what we talked about was an issue that I haven't heard addressed too much, and that is one of the biggest obstacles to becoming a leader is time, but in the sense the time required to put into being a leader and being involved. And what's related to that is, well, how much time do you spend with what else is important to you in your life, meaning your family, friends, etc. To me, that's one of the personal things I've struggled with a lot. And getting personal, 15 years ago, my wife and I had very serious discussions about all of this, and I deliberately stepped back for about 5 years or so. My son was still young and at home. And the main reason I'm standing is I want to encourage all the young people here, do your best, put in the time and the work, but keep in mind that time needs to be devoted also to what's important to you personally, whether that's your family or friends or not. But please keep that in mind and try to find the best time to fit all this stuff in, which isn't easy.
Pretty wise words, I agree. Dr. Harris?
Thank you very much for this wonderful session. I had a couple questions. The first one is for Erica, which is, when you're in a toxic situation, when is it time to cut loose and go somewhere else? Because part of the problem is it's usually empowered by higher up. So it's not just your chief or your chair, but it's the people above him or her. And when you're in the lower tiers, it's sometimes harder to affect change, even if you have collaboration from other people at your level. So what do we do with that? And I'll let you answer that before I ask my second question.
When there's a mismatch between your potential and what you're doing. I mean, so you can't reach your potential because you're in this environment. So it's time to change the environment.
So my second question is primarily for Ken and Murray. Murray, I'd love to hear that you had started doing this with your trainees. And the question is, can we put together some sort of toolkit on a national basis for a few key elements of leadership? We can't do the whole training. But what we've discovered is we didn't get the training in business, in advocacy, in teaching, in leadership, but we can provide it to our trainees and the medical students. And our trainees are the ones we have more control over than medical students. So what is the possibility of SCVS, SVS, the regionals getting together and taking some of what's in that leadership course, making it a little bit more compact, because we can't do that whole thing for every trainee, but putting something together that maybe we do at these meetings and some parts that we do at our homes. Thanks.
So just from personal experience, the two programs that I did, one was, three. So one was a year long, and it's really hard to do, right? But there's, I think we've learned a lot over the COVID era of what can be done virtual and what could be done asynchronous. So, we could really share almost all the content from the LDP with the program. Back to what Keith said, it's time, right? So, I take an hour out of my residence education week once a month, and we focus on leadership topics, right? And so make it a grand rounds session at your organization, use the content that's already online. I am really anti-reinventing the wheel. The content is all out there. So, just find the things that are important. But part of it is engagement and them wanting to do more and the competing interests. We're started this whole high reliability program at the hospital, and one of the components of that is if you add some work for people, you have to take something away, right? You can't just keep piling more things on. So that is what are you going to take away to add to make them do this?
And I would just add a definitive yes, Dr. Harris, we can, and we should, and we must. And I think all of these topics are shared across, but there's lots of different tools and lots of different approaches and a lot of ways to make this fun and relevant to the specific challenges that you're all facing every day. And that's what gives you the variety of the approaches. But there's you've heard it across the talks, there's a consistent curriculum. Whether you're interviewing people like Perry did or you're interviewing 3 million people like Kouzes and Posner did, we know what it is. We know what leadership is. We know what the behaviors are. It is teachable. The tools are out there. And I would really feel like all of the societies and all of the training programs can pull this together into vascular surgery's model of leadership, and that's part of what our leadership subcommittee is trying to do too with its research. So you get a definitive yes for me, and if we do it, we'll find the resources to make it happen.
Dr. Weaver?
So this was a great panel. I mean, a book that I have read that was really influential was Good to Great by Jim Collins, which is, if you haven't read it and you're interested in leadership, is absolutely spectacular. And he describes the levels of leadership, the level 3, 4, and 5 levels of leadership. And what he found is successful corporations had level 5 leadership, and what exemplified level 5 leadership was basically servant leadership. So I didn't hear much of that mentioned on the panel, and I was just wondering if I could get the thoughts of the panel about the role of literally sacrificial servant leadership in leading any kind of organization or team.
Actually, one of the CEOs brought that up, and I didn't speak to it, but servant leadership is very critical to being, I believe, a positive, impactful leader. There are a number of books out there that treat that, and one of the ones that I read is called The Flight of the Buffalo. And what that talks about is that when they found in the 1800s, the cowboys would shoot the front buffalo, the leader and the rest of the buffalo would look at each other and say, what's next? And they'd slaughter them. And when you look at a flight of geese, what happens? They share thousands and thousands of miles traveling. And they equate that to leadership and how you can effectively pass leadership on and share it as you go. So you become a servant leader and you train the others to take over as you're going down your journey. So agree with you totally.
So I didn't play the video because of time, but if you YouTube, there's like a video on the dancer leader. There's this guy in a sort of outdoor concert, music festival, who's sort of doing this crazy dance all by himself. And then there's one more person that goes up and then sort of does the same thing and becomes the first follower. And then a little while later, there's a second follower, and then 10 people, then 30 people. So I think leadership, that same kind of philosophy of servant leadership is really because the people following you want to follow you rather than what you tell them to do. So I think a little bit the Roosevelt man in the arena, you do the work, you have to be down in the sort of on ground level, boots on the ground. You have to do the work. You got to show leadership. You got to, sort of exemplify all the core values of what you want to do. And then if people want to follow you, then you become the leader. I think what I didn't say before, we mentioned it, but titles don't give you leadership authority. That gives you authority. You can be the manager at Best Buy, but you don't get people to follow you. Doing the right thing, I think that's the difference. But the videos, you should really watch the video. It's fantastic. And then there's this whole thing with the swallows, kind of like the way they move, the communication, and the sort of expecting to do sort of all work together, and the teamwork around that is really amazing.
Please present yourself and ask your question. Thank you.
Sure. Ted Gifford, Hartford Hospital. First, I want to thank all the members of this panel. I think this is incredibly valuable to a young surgeon in terms of trying to figure out some of the tools necessary to try to grow our leadership opportunities, both locally, regionally, and nationally. And I want to thank all the societies for their support. One of the things that I've started to notice as I've gone into more and more meetings, as I get further and further into practice, is that as surgeons, we don't speak the language of leadership. And I think that's really important. I didn't go into vascular surgery so that I could learn how to present a pro forma to my administration. However, when I go there, I really need to know how to do that. I think Dr. Teixeira and Dr. Harris kind of touched on it briefly. I think that's something that, at least as a young surgeon, I would really advocate for, is learning the vocabulary of leadership so that we can present that effectively and really speak for the resources that we all need. Thank you.
We'll take the last question.
Thank you for the great talk. Isibo Aridise from New Haven. As has been said, leadership takes time. And my question to the leaders on the panel and the room is, how do you stay in touch with what lies on the horizon? Or how do you get data that helps you anticipate and take action based on what lies ahead, so we're not just reacting to the realities of the moment?
I wish I had an easy answer to that question. We live in a world that's driven by data. Most institutions are now collaborating to some degree with multi-institutional data sets that try to show trends. We know the limitation of these things. A lot of the insurance participation and claims data, those things, you see where the markets are going. Having an attuned and a comprehensive idea of how politically things are going, how the movements are, the shifts in the healthcare space, it's all very important. But a lot of it is going to be a gestalt, right? Is the EQ, your emotional intelligence to be able to read between the lines of the landscape that are changing. I'm in a very interesting situation in a city, a large city with a new medical school that was built in collaboration with a well-established healthcare system. That created a significant shift in culture and in the environment. A lot of people in the city were not able to anticipate the changes, and it became challenging for a lot of people. So it's really important. A lot of the information is not going to be specific. You're going to have some gestalt.
My experience in that space is about creating a vision together, collaborating and working with your team on establishing where's the direction you're going to go in the vision. In my head, I would often have the direction where I wanted the team to go. Oftentimes, they'd shift it because I would learn from them as well. So being an impactful, positive leader for me was about sitting in and understanding their perspective as well as mine, and understanding that I treated them with fairness. That was my goal.
Audra, you had a word to say.
I would just say one of my sort of secret weapons is making sure I talk to everybody. So, I moved to another country, had to learn a whole new healthcare system. And I found that many of my resources were not hospital administration or so on. It's kind of the people doing the hard work. And I endeared myself to as many people as I could, and I talked to them all the time. And I get information before maybe it's given top down. And I think the more people that are in your network of people who trust you and who want to share with you, the better. And and I have, just because they might have a role that's perceived as lower than mine, doesn't matter. You talk to everybody and you'll get information. And it's kind of it's really a kind of, it's not a secret, but it's really a special way to get moving along and getting things in advance.
Thank you. So I'm going to close this session now. Again, I want to thank the audience, the presenters.